let's see what we can see here. This has a pretty normal takedown for a gun where the slide stop slide release is the takedown method. So that comes out of there. There's a little tiny notch that it comes out, and slides comes right off. Recoil spring assembly. I made that guide rod, but it looks exactly the same. Barrel, it's flared out at the end as a bull barrel. Really cool target, recessed crown there. Taking the firing pin out, super simple, pretty much like a CZ. Pop that sucker right out, the back plate, firing pin comes out, spring. Extremely simple. External extractor. So even though this is kind of like 1911, it's kind of like a lot of other guns like SIGs or CZs and stuff. So anyway, knock that pin out, capture the extractor. There's a single spring there. Nothing fancy. Fiddle around with it. Get it all jacked up. You got to drop the front of it inside of the chamber area there, the breech face area there, and then it falls right in. There you go. You can see it. No problem. Make sure it's all lined up. Little taparoo. Get your punch and drive that down flush. And easy money. Got that. That's like the entire slide. You're not taking anything else apart unless you're doing sights or something. Super simple. Definitely simple. That this whole gun I feel like is extremely simple with basically hardly any parts. So to get everything else apart, you got to take the scales off, the grip panels, Torx. I don't know what it is. It's a 20 or something. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm guessing it's an 832 screw. I didn't check, but it's pretty small, but not tiny. It's about the same size as like your holsters or whatever. Anyway, take the scales off, throw the wrench on the ground, pick it back up. Normal picking gun apart stuff. Get those out of the way. And then there is a single pin. It's got a little flanged head on it, so it only goes out one direction. And you can pretty easily push that out. There might be some tension on the mainspring, so make sure you hold on to things. And that should come right out. Once you get that guy out of there, somebody asked me about it. They had a hard time getting their mainspring. This has been taken apart a few times, so it comes right off. But that housing, aluminum, I guess, is kind of cool. Anyway, the sear spring, and then getting the safeties off is a little bit of a struggle. I cut a bunch out here because I got frustrated with it. But it's kind of somewhere in between on and off, and then you can get it loose, and probably people are cringing right there because I stuck that little screwdriver in there. But anyway, I don't have fingernails and I couldn't get it out, and everything's still really super tight. This gun hasn't even been shot. So anyway, other safety, there's kind of a keyhole slot. It secures the pin that holds the hammer. That pin comes right out. Again, it's just like the pin that holds the mainspring housing on. It has a slight flange on the head, and when you pull it out, that was the spring, detent spring for the safety there. Sort of similar to 1911. It just has a spring and a plunger. Anyway, that pin is directional. It has a flanged head on one side, and it comes right out, no problem. Pull the hammer out, and that could come apart further, but I'm not taking it apart because why? And then you can lift that whole chassis out of there. Hooray, there's a chassis, which is actually pretty sick. Makes it a million times easier to work on. A kid screaming at me from the other room. Anyway, the chassis makes it easy to work on everything, get it out. The single pin here that holds the disconnector and the sear, and it comes right out super easy. I'm going to kind of try to hold the pieces together there so you can see their orientation. Make sure you put them back in correctly. You potentially could put them in weird. Anyway, there's the chassis. pretty slick. Trigger comes out. Not sure, I didn't take any dimensions, but slightly different than some of the triggers I'm seen before. It's whatever. Anyway, then the safety is just like a CZ75 or CZ Shadow or something like that. And I kind of have to fiddle around with it, hit it a little bit because, well, I'm trying to do this on camera and, whatever. Anyway, it should slide out easily either direction. I get it all hung up here and messing around with it. But there is a single screw head that only rotates a few degrees right and left and retains the spring and keeps the safety inside the gun. It keeps the mag release inside the gun. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, there's the screw type thing. It's not actually a screw. There's a little leg on it, and it locks into slots in this thing. And there's your spring. Pretty simple. Really easy to swap from left to right if you're trying to change sides with your mag release or replace your mag release or just clean it or whatever. Anyway, I'm going to put the sear and everything back together in here. Kind of got to hold it just so it's lined up and drop the pin back in there and just kind of make sure that everything's correctly aligned and you didn't put the disconnector or the sear on the wrong side of the pin or something weird. And I'm just checking, make sure I got everything back together and it moves freely and should move freely. Everything should be moving around in there like no problem. I thought I recorded putting the mags release back in there, but apparently not. Anyway, here's the trigger going back in, and I goof it all up by when I drop this chassis back in there. I somehow managed to drop the sear and disconnector in front of the trigger, which that doesn't work, and I don't notice until I go drop the hammer in here and it won't go in there, and I'm confused about why. But the reason is because I've assembled the gun incorrectly and I didn't make sure the trigger was forward before I put that assembly in there, and I kind of try to show you right here. Anyway, pop the chassis back out, push the trigger forward, put the chassis back in. Now you're cooking with fire. So there you go. Make sure everything's where it's supposed to be. Yeah, cool. Drop the hammer back in. Put the hammer pin back in there to hold the hammer. And then lose your mind trying to fiddle around with the safeties and put the safeties back in. So I cut there because I got all frustrated. But anyway, it's kind of fiddly. Everything is kind of like a lot of safeties and stuff. You kind of got to start everything at the same time and make sure everything lining up with each other and get it just so, and then push the detent spring there and plunger out of the way and kind of snap it in. And remember, you have that keyhole action on the on the right hand safety. And so you're trying to get that in and not push the pin out. And I don't know. It's kind of fiddly, but I don't think it's probably any worse than any other 1911 type safeties. Anyway, I struggle here. I get it together eventually. Hooray. Here in a second, I'll snap it in and make sure I got it. And you want to make sure that the safety actually is a safety and the detent's moving freely and it locks into place up and down. And now you got to kind of fiddle around here with the sear spring assembly and all this stuff. Drop that in there. It looks like the sear and the spring are just standard 1911 fare. So I've heard people buying Evolution Gunworks kits and swapping out the spring and the sear and the hammer. That sounds likely. I haven't done it, so I don't know. But anyway, when you get that in there, you want to make sure that that spring is sitting on top of the disconnector and the sear and not like in between or under. And you'll know when you go to shove this thing on, this mainspring housing on, if it binds up going on there, you probably got some kind of issue. If you have the hammer all the way depressed, you should have very little tension against that mainspring, and it should go on easily, like sit all the way down. You got to make sure that it's aligned with the spring. This is what I'm doing here. Wiggle, wiggle. Get it in there. It goes right on. I'm not even holding nothing. It's just sitting there. Pop the pin back in. Again, it only goes one way. Put the scales back on the gun, the grips. And that's easy peasy. They had some Loctite on them. You probably want to put some Loctite back on them. Some grips will have like a little rubber O-ring under them or something that helps keep the screw from unscrewing. These ones did not. I messed up and put this cover plate back on backwards, so make sure you orient the right way. There's a slight notch there cut out to go by on the ejector. Springs, slider back on the gun. Pop the slide stop, slide release back in there, just like tons of guns. There's a tiny notch there, hard to see. Rack the slide a bunch. Check the gun for function, safety, trigger, all that stuff. Good to go. I'll run a couple trigger pulls here. I messed around with the sear spring slightly. I don't think I improved the weight of the trigger pull. It's running about 3 pounds 9 ounces, which is kind of a bummer. I'd really like this gun to have a trigger that's 2.5 pounds. That would be ideal. You know, I mean, I think they kind of made it for everybody. And I think a lot of people will look at this trigger and think it's real nice. And it is decent. I'd like it to be a little lighter. But it's because I'm going to shoot it in competition and that sort of thing. Here's a couple of trigger pulls and some resets. Beautiful gun. It's like a mix between a CZ and a 1911. And it's super simple. There's hardly any parts in there. Feels good. Looks good. I hope that's helpful to anybody trying to pull it apart.